too. Okay. So yeah, so I feel like I know this topic of around disordered eating very personally, but also I've had to been forced um, to understand the disordered eating from a neurobiological point of view, from a psychological point of view, from a spiritual psychology point of view. I've had to really unpack it from so many points of view, because not one perspective was enough. It would help me a little, and then I would just kind of get stuck again. So I had to go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and peel so many of the layers of the onion, before I was really able to kind of get free from it. And so it was with me for about 40 years of struggle, of really feeling like a train wreck. So I'm hoping that you will benefit from what I've learned personally and from what I've learned professionally. What I'd like to do is share with you some slides that kind of unpack the complexity of disordered eating. And then we're going to take a look at what I would say like two treatment approaches. One is the psychedelic somatic interactional psychotherapy approach. And also we're going to look at combat play. I'm suggesting jiu-jitsu, but jiu-jitsu is just a metaphor or one possibility. And it ultimately it's the concept of play, combat play, and how it is a critical, necessary part, in my opinion, to really take the healing of disorders to a whole other level. Okay, so with that, I'm going to load some slides up to give you some of the foundational information, and then I'm going to take the slides down, and then we can do more question and answers. All right. Oh, you'll have to give me host again.
Oh, sorry about that. I got you. There we go.
All right. So we're going to take a look at healing of disordered eating, all the various disordered eating patterns, with the support of psychedelic therapy and with the support of, let's just call it in a general way, play. Okay. So first, I would like to just touch on some references where I am getting this information from, acknowledge some of the scholars that have really supported me. I would like to just introduce a few of my team members that are here on the call. And then I'm going to touch in a little bit into my history. And then we're going to dive right into how to assess for eating disorders and how to treat eating disorders. We're going to look at it from three lenses: interpersonal neurobiology lens. We're going to look at it through that psychedelic somatic interactional psychotherapy lens, and then the polyvagal lens. Polyvagal lens that is your neurobehavioralism lens. That's another kind of neurobiology lens. And we are going to unpack combat play through the lens of neurobiology and how it can actually help support the treatment of eating disorders. Now, with that, I'm not suggesting that anyone in this room or anyone listening to this recording needs to go out and do jiu-jitsu. That is not what this is about. I'm going to use jiu-jitsu as a metaphor, as a form, one example of an infinite possibilities that can actually encourage a lot of neural exercise, like a lot of, let's call it like brain fitness, that can facilitate a healing of disordered eating. So jiu-jitsu is one example of combat play, but there are many other examples to actually build some of this neurological kind of, let's call it fitness. Okay. All right. So for references, let's get this out of the way. So I'm going to be referencing a lot of material from Dr. Dan Siegel with interpersonal neurobiology. I'm going to be referencing a lot of material from Stephen Porget's work with the polyvagal theory and neurobehavioralism. I'm going to be referencing my supervisor, Saj Ravi, with the psychedelic somatic interactional psychotherapy model. James Hillman with spiritual psychology and imaginal psychology, and Donald Winnicott. He was instrumental in, Donald Winnicott is a psychoanalyst from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and really took a look at children's play and wanted to understand why children's play was so instinctual. And he really, really shaped a lot of my theories and a lot of my own personal work. All right. And then before we jump into a little bit of my history, I want to just share a few people who are on the call tonight. I want to reference them because they are part of my team. They've helped shape me professionally and personally. So we have Deborah. She is your internal family systems smarty pants. She's also a trauma coach. She's helped me personally and professionally, and she's really good at ritualized mind control abuse. So those who have sort of ritualized mind control trauma, she's really helpful in kind of unpacking that. And we're actually going to be talking about psychological warfare and mind control type of trauma on this call, and how it can actually influence and shape disordered eating. Okay. And then we have Tamara Smithson. She's like my playmate. She's my jiu-jitsu playmate. She's like a mama bear. She's like mama bear jiu-jitsu. I think she's on the call. And I just love her to death. And she's been instrumental in terms of my own healing, and is a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. And I think she's probably like, if I was to go anywhere on the planet to have a jiu-jitsu partner, a play partner, a playmate, it would be Tamara. She's been incredible and extremely, extremely gentle and extremely, extremely safe. So if ever you want to come to West Virginia, see someone that I'd love for you to meet and possibly, play with jiu-jitsu wise, just to get a feel for her. And then Gene is he's my teacher in jiu-jitsu. And so we call him Professor Gene. And he also assists me in some of my intensives. He's trauma-informed jiu-jitsu, and all around an incredible coach. And Chris Boatwright, I don't think Chris is here, but he's also another one of my assistants that helps me with the intensives. And he's a blue belt in jiu-jitsu, and also another guy who's just helped a number of my clients and is just all around wonderful to play with, so to speak. And you'll begin, when I unpack what I mean by play and how it supports eating disorders, you'll kind of understand a little bit more about why I'm applying jiu-jitsu and why these people are important. Okay, and Bob Pepper, I think Bob's on the call. So he was my co-researcher for my doctoral research. So him and I go back a ways. And so he once called himself the manufacturing guy because he does a lot of leadership development in the manufacturing. And we actually do a lot of, we're business partners. And so one time he called himself the manufacturing guy. And so ever since, I always call him the manufacturing guy. So he's the guy. And him and I go into organizations and do a lot of organizational psychology work. So there you have my team. And as I go through a little of my history, and as I go through some of this, I'm going to be pulling, I might be referencing them as we unpack some of this material. All right, so let's go into my history. So I'm going to pull a slide down, but I'm just to have you glance at some of the images here on this page before I pull the slide down, and then I can kind of see your faces as I'm sharing a little bit about my history. So what you see here is ultimately the aspects of disordered eating that I've had in my history. So yo-yo dieting, incredible amount of compulsive overeating and binge eating, very, 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 very severe binge eating, very severe yo-yo dieting, orthorexia. If you don't know what orthorexia is, it is a form of just severe paranoia about food and the safety of food, and if food is healthy or not healthy. And it goes beyond just normal consideration on what foods are healthy into a compulsion, into an obsession, into just a sheer paranoia. And then also just with that yo-yo dieting, just an impairment with, there's so many diets out there, and I would get caught up and swing from one diet to another diet to another diet to another diet to another diet. So I'm going to pull the slide down so I can give you a little bit more of that history and see you guys on the gallery view. There we go. Okay. So to unpack this further, when I was about the age of 9, I started dieting. I was a tall, skinny kid. They called me beanpole because I just kept sprouting. But at the age of 9, I decided to go on a diet. I didn't know what a diet meant. I didn't really understand what diets were, but I decided to pull my mother's calorie counter out, and I started memorizing all the calories of all the food that were on that calorie counter. And then I would ask people to tell me how many stairs I could run up and down in 10 minutes, and then I would figure out how many calories that was. And then by the time I was 14, I would sit in class, and on the margins of my notebook, I would write down all the calories I would eat in a day and all the calories I was going to plan to eat the following week, and what foods would actually measure up to those calories. And if I did those calories, how much weight would I lose by the end of the week and by the end of the month? And if I could do this, and I would just go obsessively every day, all the way down the columns of my notebook, over and over and over and over and over again. I knew I could tell you exactly how much every bite and how many calories were in every bite of every piece of food. I had measured it perfectly. And then by the time I was 14, 15, 16, I was then moving into like extreme dieting during the weekdays, and then I was compulsively eating on the weekends. So now you're seeing this kind of fluctuation, right, between the yo-yo kind of dieting and then the compulsive overeating. And then by the time I was maybe 18, I slowly moved out of the dieting, and I just started moving towards compulsive eating. And then the compulsive eating got worse, and it became extremely severe binge eating. I would try over and over again to try and bring some level of restriction to it, but I just couldn't. It just would escalate and escalate and escalate. And then I was getting so sick physically that I actually lost 5 feet of my intestines. I'd become so sick from, there's multiple reasons, and I'll unpack a little bit about one of the reasons, but I lost 5 feet of intestine and had a colostomy, and part of it was because of how severe the eating disorder was. And I even remember they had to do emergency surgery on me. And 2 days after the emergency surgery, when I was able to actually walk, I snuck down the stairs to the cafeteria to eat. And even though I had just had massive surgery on my intestines. So I was just in a state of compulsiveness, and I could not stop it. So that because I had such compulsiveness with the food, and at that point I had such severe scar tissue and wounding in my intestines, I kept getting bowel obstructions and kinks in my bowels because of just how much I was like putting into my body. So kept was put back in hospital more than once, for more than one surgery to unkink my bowels. I mean, it was a really difficult time, and that's just in my 20s. And then somehow I then moved back into restriction. And so I went back into I found some level of quote unquote control over my food, and then I was moving back into the yo-yo dieting. obviously I went to Overeaters Anonymous and these other 12-step programs to get some attempt at food recovery. But then I just would pendulate. Orthorexia, yo-yo dieting, binge eating, some level of anorexia or restriction over my food. And that my life was madness. So that's ultimately kind of what happened. I did see a question that someone was curious as to how I lost that 5 feet. Remind me when we get to the part of my story where I talk a little bit about my childhood, and then I'll explain how I lost those 5 feet. Okay, so I think that probably gives you a little bit enough of the details. I probably don't need to go into any more details than that. Trying to think if there's anything I've left out. Maybe just the element of I did not have bulimia in the traditional sense of vomiting or laxatives or that sort of thing. My bulimia came in a little differently, where I feel like my bulimia came in terms of the purging. I used therapy as an attempt to purge sort of what I felt was inside of me. And again, that is something that I will unpack later on as well. You'll get a better understanding of how that sort of manifested for me. So it's actually the way I was approaching therapy, the way I was trying to approach my transformational process, the way I was approaching even healing from this eating disorder was almost a bulimic type of tendency. So again, I'll unpack that more. All right, so any questions in terms of that rundown, very quick rundown on my history? I'm happy to share sort of anything around it. I don't have much concern about the publicity around it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think what I'll suggest is in the beginning, when I started healing, I was really just focusing on the compulsive eating, the severe binge eating. And I actually went into 3 eating disorder treatment plans, spent a ton of money, ton of time. So 3 eating disorder treatment programs, residential programs for the compulsive eating. I didn't think the orthorexia or the yo-yo dieting was a problem. I just was fixated on the compulsive eating because that's what was making me fat. That was what was making me sick in my mind. I thought if I just got that under control, I don't care about the rest. I didn't really get that the other ones were just as severe. They just didn't show on my body. I could get away with them. But the compulsive eating, I had such extreme shame about that was what I was trying to actually quote unquote fix in the beginning. So I did go to 3 eating disorder treatment programs, and within a week of leaving them, I'd be back into the same compulsiveness. So nothing really would change, and all it did was perpetuate the shame I felt around my struggle. I mean, it just put the last nails in that shame coffin. All right, so that's my history. So let's go into how did I heal from this, and what do I use now as a model to support others in healing from this? Okay. Any questions before I jump into that? Sorry, one question. Did doctors encourage healthy eating, and did that make the orthorexia worse? Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, I think doctors were kind of trapped, because I don't think it would have mattered what they did with me. Because you had two things that were in this war. One is I felt I had a pretty strong sugar addiction, really like simple carbs. Like if I it would throw me into massive binges. It would have me crave like crazy. And so they would encourage, okay, let's cut out some of the sugars, the flours, and move into healthier eating. But that itself would then create this paranoia in my system, which would then perpetuate the orthorexia. But the orthorexia was already there, like right from the beginning. In fact, it was there when I was 9 years old. And I'll explain again when we unpack a little bit about why later, why that was. So I would say that the cultural influences and doctors inflamed it and reinforced it. And I think culture is like, oh, wow, you eat so healthy. Oh, I wish I could eat like you. Really sort of encouraged it. But yeah, the foundation was already laid when I was quite young. Okay. All right, we're good. Okay, seeing nods. All right, so let me share these slides. So the process of healing for me did not happen overnight. It's been a very, 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 very slow process. It's been a slow process over, I'd say, since I think I started to see some slow level results back in 2007, and then slowly over time, more and more and more results. So let's go into how I healed. So I'm going to use Dr. Dan Siegel's work. And so this is Dr. Dan Siegel's work is in the realm of interpersonal neurobiology. And he talks about the self. We've got a whole self, we've got this integrative self, right? And he suggests that there are actually 9 domains that need to be shaped, that need to be nurtured in order for us to feel whole, in order for us to feel integrative, in order for us to feel like we have a really solid sense of self. And when we don't have the solid sense of self or the sense of wholeness in self, then symptomology emerges. And one of the symptomology that can emerge is disordered eating. So compulsiveness around food, obsession around food can be a symptomology of a sense of self that isn't integrated, a sense of self that isn't whole, okay? Now, so the question is, well, what are the domains of the self that need to be nurtured in order to feel a sense of integration in self, a wholeness in self, this holisticness in self? Okay? So I'm not going to go through all these 9 domains for 2 reasons. It would take all night. And second reason is we don't have to. I think just giving you the overall like high level overview will be enough. Okay, so let me unpack some of these. So the first domain that Dr. Dan Siegel talks about is what he refers to as the horizontal. All that means, well, actually, let me back up. There's one piece I need to suggest. So we have, you can, when you describe the whole self or the integrated self, we've unpacked it in our, like if you pick up a book on the evolving self or nurturing the self or the developing self, the books are often lay the groundwork on how to develop your sense of self through a psychological lens or through a spiritual lens. And I needed to see it unpacked and understood from a neurobiological lens. I needed something that was more concrete and more linear. And so I gravitated to the neurobiology world. And so Dan Siegel gives a language, gives a framework or a structure to understand the whole self from a neurobiological point of view. And so that's what we're going to unpack it from. Okay, so he suggests, again, there's 9 like neurobiological domains that need to be nurtured for us to come into a whole sense of self. Okay, so I'm going to unpack some of these, not all of these. One domain is what he refers to as the horizontal. All that means is your left and your right parts of your brain are able to talk with one another. If they don't talk well with one another, you're going to get impairments in your development of self. Okay, So we know the left brain is about logic, linearity, linguistics, and we know that the right hemisphere is more about imagination. It's more about it's more about the nonverbal cues. It's more about your feeling sense, right? And so these two places, these two pieces of the brain need to actually work together. If they don't work together, then there's going to be impairments in your ability to emerge as a whole feeling self. The other domain is your somatic. This, for those who don't know that word somatic, it just means body, right? So we need to actually be able to have a felt sense experience of our bodies, right? Because the body is where the feelings are. Our bodies are where our biological needs are. It's where hunger is. It's where our spidey senses are, right? It's where our sensations are. We feel alive in our body. That's how we come alive, is through our organism, through our bodies. And so if we aren't connected with the body, we can't be connected to the self. It's like being cut off from almost your soul. So the body is a critical aspect to the developing self. The other piece is the interpersonal, right? The interpersonal is critical. It needs to be nurtured in order to nurture the self. So we come into this world, and it's how others see us and shape us. It's through the other, it's through another individual, and how they are actually meeting us is how we get shaped. It's how the sense of self gets shaped. So Dan calls this the interpersonal domain. Right. The next one is called memory. The word puzzle piece assembler is something that I've heard Dan Siegel talk about for memory, for the memory domain. Now let me unpack this. So you've got a piece of your brain called the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is responsible for assembling all of the parts of memory and experience. This is really, really important to understand, especially when we start seeing this through an eating disorder lens. So if you have a very stressful experience, and what's coming into your experience is sensations, is your own gestures, facial expressions, your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own imagery, the own timeline, right? If you've got an experience coming in, there's all those elements of that experience. What time is it? What images are you seeing? Like, what's the visuals coming in? What's the thought pattern? What's the feelings, the emotions? What's the sensations? What gestures? If you're in a car accident, the gesture is like putting your foot to the brake and you're holding the steering wheel really tight and your eyes go wide, right? Those what do we call it? Pieces to experience are all differentiated, different elements of an experience: sensation, gestures, facial expressions, emotions, thought, visuals, okay? All of those pieces of experience get channeled through the hippocampus, part of the brain. And if the hippocampus isn't able to do its job well, what happens is that memory domain doesn't get properly developed. And so then you've got almost like these experiences are like Chardonnay, where you've got some pieces actually getting properly integrated some pieces of your experience are getting properly integrated, and other pieces are just like, they're gone. You don't have access to them. This can have a huge impact on disordered eating, and I'm going to explain why in a bit. There's one piece around the memory domain that I want to emphasize, and then we're going to kind of forget about it and then come back to it. When there's stressful events that are happening or traumatic events that are happening, so for example, let's say we get what would be an example of, so let's say we get bullied as a kid. So your hippocampus, or the experience that you're taking in, is going to be any postural gestures, any kind of nonverbal cues, your own sensations, your own feelings, your own emotions, your own thoughts. But guess what else it's recording? It's recording the other person's gestures, attitudes, thinking patterns, projections on you, feeling states. And those, the other person's, let's say the perpetrators or the abusers' experience can actually get overlaid with your own. And now you don't know what your experience is from their experience. And that can have a significant impact in terms of disordered eating. So we're going to come back to that. Okay. All right. Two more. Narrative. Narrative is very close to memory, because if you don't have a proper, healthy kind of memory integration of your experiences, how can you narrate your experience? You're not going to be able to. You can't tell the story. It's going to come up in bits and parts, and it's not going to be integrated. So if I tell a story of my eating disorder and I'm talking like this, well, I had an eating disorder. Yeah, it was pretty hard. But I'm good now. Yeah. I just decided to, just follow a food plan, and it seemed to work. Yeah, I'm doing really good. That narrative is kind of missing a lot of elements, right? It's dissociative, it's very linear, there's not a lot of emotion to it. So that would suggest a narrative that's kind of disintegrated. It's lacking. And the reason is because there isn't a felt sense. There isn't the bottom up experiential sense that gives the narrative like a real strong impact. And again, if that doesn't make sense, just hold it lightly. We're going to come back to it. And then the last one is what's called temporal. This is, you've got a part of your brain that's constantly checking for safety. Danger, danger, danger. Am I going to die? Is it okay? What's going to happen? When we have impairments to the temporal domain, we will always be seeking certainty. Need to have certainty. Is it going to be okay? Is it safe? Certain? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? That sense of certainty can cause so much kind of paranoia that we can't live life. We won't experience. We're always seeking that sense of certainty, right? We're always trying to make sure that we're in a permanent place, and we don't like impermanence. We don't like uncertainty. We don't like things that might be unsafe. It's like the risk checker is super, super, super high. And it's like we won't take any risks at all, because we're that like we call it the safety checker. The safety checker is just out of control. Okay. All right. So this might seem like a lot, or it may not seem like a lot, but as we go through it, I think it's going to make a little bit more sense as I go through examples. But what I'd like for you to do, if you've got a pen and a piece of paper, is actually just write down these domains, because we're going to come back to them over and over and over again. And I'd even like for you to just, as maybe not right now, but as we go through this, take a look at, if you're on this call and you've got some sort of disordered eating scenario that's going on in your world, or maybe you've got a loved one that has disordered eating patterns, see if you can see what domains of the sense of self might be impaired, okay, according to this chart. All right. Okay. So I'm going to switch to the next slide. It's going to have the same words on it, but I'm going to ask you guys a question. Okay. So here's my question. Let's take a look at the 4 of 5 different types of disordered eating patterns. And let's see if you were to pick one of these domains of the self that could be impaired, could be weak, could be unnurtured or unfostered. Which domain do you think is undeveloped for each of those 4 or 5 eating disorders that we've talked about? Okay. And this is where I'd like to kind of get your guys' engagement. So if I take this slide down so I can see your faces, do you guys have the slide written down enough that I can take it down and you've got at least got it there as a framework? Is that okay? Because I'd rather see your faces than see this. Because I can't see your faces, I don't know if you guys were nodding or not.
You could also maybe
All right.
copy and paste the text from your slide into the chat and it could be visible there.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. All right, let's go through something like, let's talk about orthorexia. And I just know that if you've got any sort of emotional eating or disordered eating, you probably have more than one domain that needs to be developed. But for simplicity's sake, we're just going to say you've just got one, just to make it easy for now. Okay. So let's look at orthorexia for beginning, for first one. So orthorexia is really about, right, paranoia, or maybe I don't want to use that word. Extreme fear about the food that gets put in a person's mouth, that it's going to be, yeah, okay, people are already guessing it. I saw someone comment. You want to put in the chat what you think it is? Yeah. Okay. All right. So we got temporal, we got somatic. Who else wants to take a guess? Temporal, narrative. Okay. Anyone else want to throw their opinion in? Somatic. Okay. All right. So you're both, so people have got the somatic, they've got narrative, they've got temporal. So all of those are actually like correct. You can't go wrong with any of them. The one that I'm going to lean on is the temporal. Okay. Temporal is about a deep sense of not feeling safe and needing to have certainty. It's a real sense of, I'm going to die if I eat this. Okay. The other ones are also applicable, like because there's going to be other aspects here, and I'll unpack some of these other ones later. But if I was to pick one, I'd say temporal. If we just were forced to pick one. Okay, okay, let's try another one. Binge eating. You kind of technically can't go wrong because like they're all pretty, they can all impact eating disorders. So we got somatic, memory. Memory, that's an interesting one. Anyone else want to throw theirs in? Interpersonal. Okay. Interpersonal. Yep. All right. So again, I'd say you're all right. And this is a tricky one. Narrative. Yeah. It's a tricky one because I would have to say, I'm not sure which one I would pick. Because they all can have such a powerful impact. But I'm going to suggest it's actually somatic. Okay. Or possibly narrative, or not narrative, but the memory piece. So if we just focus on somatic, if you think about binge eating, it's an attempt at regulating the nervous system. It's an attempt at actually, so if you're flooded and overwhelmed, and the system doesn't know how to actually regulate that flooding and that hyperarousal, it will reach to food, it'll reach to binging in order to actually calm the nervous system down. Okay? So that's one possibility. I'm going to just touch on memory. We'll come back to that one later. So, or eating disorders are, I almost suggest, is like Morse code. It's like SOS code. And we're trying to unpack the Morse code. And so let's, for example, say you have some level of rape, molestation in your background, where you were put in a position of deep, deep, deep immobility, chronic states of being immobilized. Then what can happen is, guess what also keeps you immobilized? Chronic severe binging. So as a result, the binging can actually be an impairment in that memory and narrative integration. It's an attempt at reenactment. So I wanted to say, for everyone who's kind of posting this, you're all right. Like, everyone's got, like, there's elements of interpersonal and narrative as well in the binge eating. We'll unpack that later. Okay, let's look at something like yo-yo dieting, or fleeing from one diet to another. Over here, over here, over here. Okay, temporal. Temporal somatic. Anyone else? Left, right brain, memory. Okay, all right. Interpersonal. Okay, great. Ah, narrative. Okay, so again, you guys are all right. Like, yeah, you're all right. And I'm going to actually just suggest where I might take it first if I was working with someone at this and I didn't know anything about their trauma background or anything like that. I would first examine their left, right brain. I'd look at that bilateral. Okay. So let's unpack it. So you've got someone following a food plan. They're following some way of eating, some diet, and off they go. They're following it, following it, following it. And that's sort of the left hemisphere engaging. They're off, they're doing their thing. And then the right hemisphere bubbles up some, like the body starts informing the right hemisphere of, oh, I'm hungry. Oh, there's this going on. Oh, I'm noticing some changes happening in my body. Not sure what I do with that. So the right hemisphere receives that. And the left hemisphere is like, I don't know what you want me to do with this input coming in from the right hemisphere, because it doesn't compute with what I'm doing. I'm doing the food plan. I'm doing this food plan. What information you're giving me, telling me to change, maybe it's just a minor change that needs to be done. Maybe you have to add a snack, or maybe there's something kind of happening. And the right hemisphere is trying to talk to the left hemisphere to make some sort of maybe minor adjustment. And the left hemisphere doesn't know what to do with it. It's like, do not compute, do not compute. I'm following this food plan. This is the structure. This is what we do. And then, so then what happens is the right hemisphere can actually start talking a little louder and a little louder. And then the left hemisphere goes, oh, this must be an emergency. And then it just like, okay. And then it switches to the next food plan. Oh, okay, then maybe this will do it. And then it'll do that for a while. And then the body's making adjustments and making changes, and the right hemisphere is feeling that and informing the brain. And the left hemisphere does not know how to process it. It doesn't know how to make sense of it. And so it actually sees it at almost like, oh, like a sense of urgency, like something's gone wrong. And then it actually switches. Okay. And so then you just have this the left hemisphere chasing the next thing and the next thing, as opposed to the two of them working together and regulating one another. Okay. Now, as I say that, you might be thinking, well, that sounds like an impairment in the body or a temporal impairment. Those things can definitely contribute to it. Yeah. All right. One last one, anorexia. Narrative, somatic, memory, interpersonal. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else? Interpersonal. Yeah. Temporal. Mm-hmm. Okay. So again, you're all right. Like everyone's like, the answer is yes. It can be all of these things, multiple things. I'm going to lean on the interpersonal. So one, sometimes, not always, but one thing that can happen is that with anorexia, you're literally cutting yourself off from your body. And it can almost feel like you are able to separate yourself from the other. You have some sort of agency or control, and it can create a feeling of almost superiority. And then you've got some distance from the other. You've got some separation. You don't need people as much because you got yourself, you've got the superiority. You can do this. You're in control, right? Now you don't have to feel vulnerable. You don't have to need others. There's no need for that co-regulation. It can also temporal, memory, somatic are also all there, as well as narrative. Okay. Are you guys kind of getting the drift of where I'm going with this? Is this making sense? Okay. Questions before we move on? All right. Okay. All right. Let me share the slide then. Yeah. Hang on one sec. I want to. There we go. That's better. All right, let's go through a couple of examples. So we're going to go a little bit deeper and see if you can catch the domains that get impaired. So Zoe is 18 months old. She's sitting on the carpet staring at the door. Her mom has just closed behind her. Her bottom lip begins to quiver and she takes a few gaspy breaths and bursts out into tears. She turns briefly to the woman sitting on the couch nearby and is in deep distress, as is to say, my mom is gone, help me. Then within a few minutes, mom is back and Zoe's prayers are answered. Mom opens the door and walks in saying, I'm so sorry, sweetie. I had to go talk to someone. Mom steps over her baby and picks up a cookie from the bowl on the counter and starts to talk about how good the cookie smells. Boy, doesn't this smell good. She passes the cookie to Zoe, who quickly stifles her tears and is looking at the cookie with a blank expression, reaching out a chubby little hand to hold the cookie and smell it like mom suggests. Zoe grows up with an emotional eating issue. Okay. Okay. So what is happening here? What's happening here for Zoe? Can you get a sense on what domains would get impaired? So I'm going to kind of unpack it a little bit. So First off, Zoe's got some big feelings, right, in her body that are coming up. So she's sad, she's mad, she's worried, she's confused. All of these feelings are in the body. And she's looking for help on how to kind of organize them. And the caregiver, mom, comes in and isn't able to actually attune to Zoe and her body and her feelings. There isn't that attunement there. So what's going to happen if this gets repeated over and over again, there's going to be an impairment in the somatic realm. Okay? Zoe's not able to, she's too young to organize her own feelings and make sense of what's going on and have that kind of fed back to her. She needs mom to help with that. So there's going to be a somatic impairment there. Also, the cookie is coming in to do self-regulation. So instead of it actually being a nice, healthy overwhelm of the child's nervous system and then being able to regulate that nervous system with mom's help, it's overwhelm of the nervous system, and then the cookie's coming in to actually create a little bit of a numbing. Right? So if Zoe eats the cookie, it starts to numb the body, numb all those sensations and feelings. We have also the relational or the interpersonal is clearly being interrupted. Now Zoe is going to, over time, be redirected that every time she needs something, like she has that feeling of needing connection from another, her nervous system or her neurobiology will redirect and reach for food. So you'll have this coupling. So in the somatic world, we call it coupling. There's now a coupling between the raw, real, biological urge to reach for another, to soothe, to co-regulate, to collaboratively regulate the emotions, and it's now being coupled with a food. So she feels that impulse, and all of a sudden she gets a craving for food. Okay. There's also going to be a narrative impairment. Can you guess why? Can you guess why there'll be a narrative impairment? Think about, what is mom's narrative? What do you think mom's narrative in this simple example is? It could be something like, I'm not comfortable with your tears. I'm not comfortable with your anger. We don't know the rest of it, but if Zoe maybe protests a little more, maybe mom might get really frustrated with her, like, oh, what are you doing? I was only gone for a moment, and maybe just slightly maybe shaming Zoe. So now what narrative gets overlaid with Zoe's narrative? Zoe's narrative is, Mom, you left and now I'm sad and mad, and where'd you go? And I want you back. That's her narrative. But now it's getting overlaid with mom's narrative. Because maybe, remember, Zoe can't, she's too young to differentiate her experience from mom's experience. So now she's going to take on mom's frustration. She's going to take on any shame that mom might be bringing on her. So you've got this overlay starting to happen. Okay. So now Zoe is going to feel shame that's not hers. She might feel confusion and frustration that's not hers. And so now she's got this narrative that's all mixed up. It's all bunged up. It's got two people in it. Does that make sense? I want to make sure that makes sense. I'm seeing some nods. Okay. So we have 3 impairments that are happening just if this experience gets repeated over and over and over again. There's probably others, but I would say that those are the top 3. All right, so let me move on to, I'll share with you mine. So if any of this material triggers you, You can always walk away. I won't be offended. My situation might trigger some people, so I'm going to share it. But again, please, if you just need to put your headset away or just walk away, please do so. Okay, so I'm going to do this while I'm going to share my example while taking the slides off. Okay, so my example. So I had all the different types of eating disorders, which says that my example is actually quite complex and took many layers. So I'll give you just one or two of the layers that showed up for me. So for both the first 10 years of life, I was repeatedly molested. And one of the tricks that my perpetrator and his spouse would do would feed us blueberries and milk and sugar at night. And they would put a sedative in the blueberries and milk and sugar at night. And so then we would be catatonic. And so then it would be a lot easier to molest us, right? So think about just in that one piece, what's happening? What's happening to the child? Okay. Okay. So let's look at it from my history. So I had severe binge eating. Okay. So you can say that binge eating is a reenactment. It was a reenactment of the molestation. That makes sense? So you could say that's a deep somatic impairment. I want to make sure I'm getting blank looks. I just want to make sure people are tracking. Yeah. Okay. All right. So you've got rape, molestation, someone who's had a lot of beatings, etc. That's one example of how you can have the system's going to want to reenact it and move into the same experience that it had as a child. So for me, when I would binge eat to the point of severe pain, okay? Severe immobility, catatonic states. I'd eat so much, it'd be excruciating. So it really felt like I was being raped and I couldn't stop the reenactment. So you've got that one piece. Now, just in that hint of having a sedative put in my food, where did the orthorexia come from? That makes sense? Yeah. You got it. So I remember saying when I would start following a food plan, I feel like this food plan is going to kill me. Like, why would I get that thought? It's because as a child, having a sedative put in my food, I unconsciously knew that was happening, right? And that the food I was eating was poisoning me. So again, I grew up paranoid about food. So people who have had a fetal trauma or where mom smoked or mom was in a really kind of toxic environment of some sort, there's pictures of fetuses where the fetus has grown in mama's belly and began to actually put their little hand around the umbilical cord to squeeze the umbilical cord shut. Why? Because the umbilical cord, while it's a source of food, is also the source of toxicity. You see that? And so these fetuses grow up and they get orthorexia. They get eating disorders. That makes sense? So that's one example of how it can show up. The other piece, think about the projections that are put on the blueberries. Okay. So if you're getting blueberries and milk and sugar with sedative, what's the projection? Let's start with the perpetrator. What's the projection that's being put on those blueberries from the perpetrator? What are they putting? What's their hopes in those blueberries? Okay. That the child will forget. So blueberries are a source of being able to forget what's going on. So they're hoping there's going to be an impairment in the memory integration. We need you to forget. You're going to forget. It's a source of love, fake love. We love you. See, we feed you every night. We give you your favorite food. We love you. We pick these in the backyard. We love you, right? So now you have this. So the food is an impairment. The blueberries have become an impairment to the interpersonal domain. Makes sense? And if the child, say, protests and it's like, I don't want it tonight. No, I'm not hungry. I'm not hungry. Then what can happen is then the next narrative or the next piece that projection that comes in is, but we made this specially for you. You don't say no. You don't say no to us. We made this for you. We love you. You eat this. And now there's a shame narrative, right? That's coming on. Okay. So all of those narratives get put onto the food. And in addition, then there's the child's narrative. So the child's narrative is, I'm scared. So this food is scared. And the child's narrative is, I want it to be true that they love me, that this is a source of love. I don't want to know the truth. So all of that is right, like all of that is being projected on that food. That's huge to unravel. That's a lot. That's like memory and narrative integration that needs to all be unpacked. All of those nuances need to be unpacked. If you take a look at something like Zoe's example, what's mom's expectations? What's being put on that food when she hands it to Zoe? It's no different. Mom's expectations is, here's your source of comfort, Zoe. Food is a source of comfort. Zoe's looking at the food going, I don't know, as confusion. And it's like, huh? Right? So there's going to be confusion there on her part, almost maybe a no. Before it gets repeated over and over and over again, Zoe's response to that food is going to be no. Zoe's response to that food is going to be confusion. Mom's response to that food is yes. I love you. Here's what you can use to soothe. That's going to be incredibly confusing on that child's brain, trying to unpack all that. Then Zoe's going to show up either having emotional eating or yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no with food. Does that make sense? Okay. Right. All right. So I feel like I wouldn't mind stopping it there, because that I feel like was a lot just to go through. We haven't even gotten to the psychedelic piece, and it's already been like an hour. So you guys can tell me how you'd like to, if this has been useful, and how you'd like to maneuver from here. Maybe we can just do question and answers from here. What you'd like to hear.
Do you want to just have people hop on the microphone or?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, yeah. Someone was asking about bulimia specifically.
Okay.
It's like Allie has a question though.
Allie, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, I wanted to remind you about my earlier question about the 5 feet intestine. And when you were talking about your childhood experience.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's talk about that, and then we'll talk about the bulimia piece. Yeah, so I got trying to think of how to put this. So there was no diagnoses. They couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. But the intestines had become extremely inflamed, ulcerated, and it just stopped working. And they diagnosed it. They had to put a diagnosis to it. So they put a diagnosis of ulcerative colitis. but the biopsy did not come back as ulcerative colitis. And it is my theory, now knowing, having a better narrative and a better memory integration, I've had to unpack. So with my history with needing to forget, and that was so strong within my history, the perpetrators and the bystanders all wanting me to forget. That was a form of extreme sort of mind control, psychological warfare that was really done on me, hardcore. Multiple threats to make me forget. So as a result, as I've actually unpacked and not forgotten and reclaimed a lot of those memories, what my theory is on why I lost so much of my intestine is because of these sedatives, that I was given it so often as a child that I was getting constipation. And that was back in the 70s and 80s when I think sedatives weren't, I mean, those sedatives were not designed for kids. And I think it was a little rougher on the edges back then. I think modern medicine has made some safer versions of sedatives. And so I think that's what actually did it. The trauma combined with the sedative, I think, is what actually caused the whole bowel to implode. And then, sorry, did you have a follow-up question to that?
No, I just want to say it's a lot of reclaiming your memories.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. So let me unpack the bulimic question, which is, so with the bulimia, when you have, so if you've got something inside of you that you don't want inside of you, whether it's perpetration or rape or it can be multiple things, the system will that it's part of the Morse code, right? You're going to see that reenactment come forward. So I'll give you, so here's an example. So most people who have any sort of disordered eating is going to have had some cultural or community or family version of being exploited as a child. Either the mind was exploited, their attachment drives were exploited, their body was exploited. Okay. So when you're exploited, when your body's being exploited, when your attachment drives are exploited, when your mind's being exploited, and what I mean by exploited is controlled, where your body, your mind is not yours. It's someone else. In my case, I was a blow-up doll for someone else's pleasure. A lot of children, their minds have been exploited. So, we have a culture where people are kind of seen as just an empty shell that others can inject their change into. So that is a form of exploitation. Okay. So the nervous system, the organism, feels that exploitation. It feels the control. It feels like someone else is in them and is controlling them. Okay, controlling the mind, controlling the body. That's what it feels like, because that's what has to happen. There's your own psyche, your own sense of self has to evaporate for someone else to come in and take over. That makes sense? So it's like the psyche leaves, you've dissociated, the psyche leaves, and now you're an empty vessel, and now someone else, you're way more easily controlled, way more easily manipulated. The psychological warfare is just, you can do whatever you want with that child now. And we're seeing that in just with the way technology is going, it's perpetuating, we're perpetuating this whole cycle. But the point is, what's bulimia? The aspect of purging is an attempt on getting out of the body what's inside of it. And so the Morse code or the reenactment is an attempt at purging whoever's gotten inside the mind, inside the body. So it's trying to purge it out. And so that shows up as exploitation. Your body's been exploited, your mind's been exploited, someone else is now in control, and the body is trying to show you that through the bulimia. Okay. So that showed up for me not as an actual purge, but it showed up for me in the way I was doing my psychotherapy, my own personal psychotherapy work. I was very compulsive with it, and I was almost using it as a way to purge like discomfort out of me, as opposed to actually help really work it through. And it never worked. All right. So I did see, okay. Chris, do you mind telling me, just helping me go through some of the questions?
No problem. Yeah, we got a few good ones here. Let's see. How do we get the narrative back?
Oh, okay. I think that's the best question ever. All right, so let's move this into, let's talk about the psychedelic somatic interactional psychotherapy model. And we'll use that, we'll kind of tie two topics in, the narrative, and I'm going to call it the PSIP model. So narrative and memory integration, I found, at least for me, have been critical. And the PSIP model is really a good model to use in order to help actually bring back those memories. So if you think about, okay, in order to unpack narrative, you have to go to memory first. So our bodies are like a tape recorder, and it's recording our experiences. So it's recording the feeling sense, the sensational sense, the gestures in the body. Okay? It's recording the emotions and the thoughts and the visuals and the timelines. But the body doesn't record it as one smooth, seamless kind of story. It processes and it takes its information in differentiated elements, right? Like it's processing the gestures, and that's coming in as one channel. It's processing the sensations, that's coming in as one channel. It's processing the imagery, that's coming in as one channel. Does that make sense? So you have all these different pieces that are being recorded of your experience. And then that becomes, all of those pieces, when they come together as a integration, then it becomes memory. So you've got, oh, my hand went like this. I remember an incident when I went fly fishing and I tripped over a rock and my hand went down into the water, right? There's an experience. The body's recording that, and it's recording the hand moving down. It's recording the gut feeling you had. It's recording the overwhelm. It's recording your thought pattern. It's recording the visual. It's recording the timeline. It's recording the smells, etc. But it's all recording them on different channels. Okay? Then you got that hippocampus that comes in and goes, I'm going to take all of these different channels of input and I'm going to sew them together to give you a coherent memory and narrative. Okay. All right. Well, let's say you have these adverse childhood experiences where the hippocampus they're too intense, or they're too chronic, or they're being repeated in a way in which just causes the hippocampus to not be able to process these differentiated elements of memory accurately, and it can't integrate them, can't give you that narrative. Children who need to stay in denial about their parents, because if they really saw their parents the way their parents were, it would overwhelm them so much. So the hippocampus blocks them from seeing the truth. Okay. So how do we get that back? Okay, so we're going to use the PSIP model. All of those differentiated elements are still in the body. They're still recorded. They're just like Chardonnay. They're just being sprayed all over the place. So when we do the PSIP model and we take something like ketamine, what are we doing? Ketamine, if you're doing legal ketamine, or if you're doing cannabis, if you're in a state where cannabis is legal, let's just explore those two. Those psychedelics, they lift the lid of the left hemisphere. Now you got the lid lift, and now you're working with the right hemisphere. Okay, now you can actually start dropping down into the map of the body. Inside the body, there's going to be all of those pieces of that fragmented memory or recording. You're going to feel a sensation here. You're going to have a gesture come up. You're going to have an emotion. You might have a child thought. All of these differentiated, fragmented pieces of experience are going to start coming forward, right? With the help of that psychedelic, accessing the right hemisphere, going into body, beginning to name the sensations, the gestures. So that begins to actually access these memories and the narrative. Then the next piece is, in that model, we then use what's called a relational lens. We begin to step into, so me as the practitioner, the therapist, I'm going to try and take on a role that the nervous system needs. And so I might be the bystander, or I might end up being seen as the perpetrator, maybe the mom that wasn't there. Right? And I don't try to fix that, because as that gets projected onto me, then that actually helps the narrative. It helps the memories come back. Okay? We don't want to change that too quickly. We don't want to give a corrective too quickly, because then it's going to interrupt and thwart that memory integration. So what the nervous system is doing is, as you lift the lid, you start going in, I'm going to say, let's create some eye contact, because in that eye contact, I think we might be able to sense what your body is projecting. What's the projection that's coming out forward towards me? And let's just feel into that. Let's just see what that's all about. Let's just play with that, because that's going to help you reclaim your memories. So maybe I might be the bystander mom who wasn't at all useful, was kind of obsolete. Or maybe I was the villainous dad, or whatever kind of wants to show up. And I'm just sitting there, I'm not doing anything, but the body is giving me a role. And then we just stay with that and we work with that. Tell me more about that role. Because now, as you get that role, you're going to start getting your memory. As you get that memory, you're going to start getting your narrative. Then it's like, you'll be able to sense the difference between, oh, this isn't even my shame. I'm feeling shame right now, but it's not mine. It's actually coming from the outside. And now you've got this differentiation. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to just pause there. So this question is kind of quite loaded, and just on that piece, is there any follow-up questions? I'm going to add one more piece. So I had said that we don't give a corrective. We do give a corrective, but we want to make sure we've actually evoked those event memories, right? We have to evoke those event memories first. So if we come in too quickly with the corrective, we're going to thwart those event memories, and then you won't get your memory and narrative integration to the same degree. So we're always kind of playing that line between offering the corrective, because that's what the system is craving, but being able to actually expand the window of what you can tolerate for that event memory, so that the hippocampus can begin to actually reprocess it and give you a healthy narrative. Right. Okay.
Yeah, we got some more questions
Yeah,
if you want.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's see. Well, Deborah's asking just the connection to Jiu-Jitsu specifically with overcoming trauma like this.
Okay. Yeah, so let's talk about Jiu-Jitsu and eating disorders. So combat forms of play have been it's part of our biology, our organism. So something like peekaboo is actually a survival game. The peekaboo game that infants do is very, very instinctual. You don't have to teach a baby how to do peekaboo game. And it is there because it is a survival game. What is it doing to the infant? It's doing three things. It's evoking the mobilization response, the startle response, right? That's one. If you're going to survive in the wild, you need to be able to mobilize. You need to be able to actually have tolerance for that startle response and mobilize. The peekaboo game is priming the brain to know how to mobilize. Cops and robbers, same thing. I gotta run away from the robber, right? Mobilizing. That's a survival skill. Second, mom or dad's got their face covered. Now, all of a sudden, what the baby is learning is how to read nonverbal cues. Safe nonverbal cues from not safe nonverbal cues. Right? Why is that important? Again, it's a survival skill. I need to know, if I'm a baby, what are safe nonverbal cues, what's a friendly face, and what's a scary face that I need to run from. It's the second piece. Okay. All right, I'm gonna just stop with those. I won't go into the third piece. Okay, I will. I think I feel like I need to do this first. So the third is, in peekaboo games or cops and robbers or children's games, you are embodying various archetypes. You're embodying the archetype of the villain or the perpetrator or the abuser. You're embodying the victim. You're embodying the friend, the lover, right? You're embodying the hero. That is so critical as a survival skill. You need to know what it feels like to be a perpetrator. You need to know what it feels like to be a villain if you're going to actually know what a villain is on the outside. You're not going to be able to track on the outside what a perpetrator or what a villain looks like if you can't feel it from the inside. And so children's play is practicing these skills in order for the nervous system to feel safe. It's an internalization of safety that's occurring. Okay. Because if you have the survival skill of detection, you can detect a threat. Oh, that's a scary face. I need to run from that face. If you're able to mobilize in that threat and fight or flee, then guess what? The nervous system feels safer. It's like, oh, I have my own back. I can detect threats, and I know what safe faces are and friendly faces are from non-friendly faces. I know how to run. I know how to fight. Now I feel safer in my own skin. I feel safer in my own body. So combat games are there to help us internalize a sense of safety. They give us survival skills. Jiu-Jitsu is just one of an infinite number of adult games to keep practicing this because we need it. We're not meant to stop playing games when we get to be adults, because when we do that, we actually lose the survival skill. We lose our ability to detect threats and respond to threats. Okay, so where does this come in with eating disorders? Eating disorders, one reason why eating disorders show up is because we don't have this internalization of safety. We don't feel safe in our own skin. So let's look at from a temporal. Remember temporal domain. Temporal is that I'm in danger. If you don't feel safe in your own body because you can't take care of yourself, you're not going to have a temporal development. If you don't have temporal development, guess what shows up? The brain will gravitate to various disordered eatings in an attempt to accommodate for the feeling of not feeling safe. So let's look at two. This is one that happened to me. So I don't have this ability. I don't feel like I'm comfortable in my own skin. I don't feel like I can protect myself if there's a threat. So you know what my brain does? It goes and compulsively overeats. Now, because it's thinking, well, if I am able to just stay immobilized and just compulsively overeat all the time and not move my body, then it's like play possum. Then I'm not going to attract any threats because I'm just, oops, sorry, pulled this out, got too excited. If you think about play possum, what do? They roll over and they're still. Then predators don't get them. Okay. So compulsive eating can be a way to keep the system immobilized and slow it down to not attract attention, right? To not attract predators, because predators like things that move. They like things that are shiny. They like things that fight, flight, and move around. So the less you move, the less you attract, the more the body feels safe. Okay. Another example would be in the orthorexia realm, or the sense of what can happen is if you don't feel safe in your own body because you don't have the survival skill, you can actually have an exaggerated form of fight flight. So you move from one food plan and all of a sudden you're like, I don't think that's going to be safe enough. And so you move to another food plan and, oh, maybe that's not going to be safe enough. So you're just fleeing all over the place, one food plan to another. And when you feel a sense of, oh, I don't quite feel safe with this food plan, and then you flutter to the next food plan, it can be because at the end of the day, you're projecting on food a sense that it's going to give you safety, when ultimately it's actually that internalization of safety that needs to come in. Okay. Again, we project way too much sense of security and safety on food when we've disowned that sense of safety in our bodies. So combat play is a way to nurture and develop this survival skill. That's what peekaboo is. It's a survival process. It's a survival game. That's what cops and robbers are. And it's an absolute essential one for the temporal domain to be developed. Otherwise, we're going to want certainty all the time, because with uncertainty creates a sense of vulnerability, like, oh, we might die. There's danger, danger, danger. So we want the perfect food plan. We want certainty. We want this. We want that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I've got a couple questions here. I think they were referencing some specific things you were talking about earlier. I figure I might maybe just invite a couple people if they want to just hop on the mic and clarify their questions. Totally optional. But yeah, Brooke had a question about memory specifically, and the being mind controlled by maybe an abuser or something like that. So yeah, Brooke, if you want to clarify, otherwise Lisa can maybe just try to kind of add on to that.
Yeah, if you can hear me, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Brooke.
Hi. So you went into it a bit when you were talking about narrative and memory together. I do have a question about that, though. You were when you were talking about using psychedelics to help lift that lid. Were you saying that the person taking the psychedelics will put themselves into the place of the perpetrator, or a therapist in the room would be the perpetrator in the exercise?
It really just depends on how the client has internalized those roles. So let me kind of slow it down a little bit more. So with these adverse childhood experiences, there's sort of 4 roles. I call them archetypal roles that get disowned or overly owned, right? Again, they become out of balance. So you've got victim, you've got perpetrator or villain, you've got the hero, and you've got the bystander. So for example, let's say if you've got an example of just maybe domestic violence in a home, and the child is the bystander, helplessly watching mom and dad fight. Okay? And maybe mom is the victim and dad is the perpetrator, or it can be very much reversed. And And so the child is looking at mama's victim, dad is perpetrator, and they're bystander. Okay. And the child is maybe orienting and looking around, wishing there was a hero, and there's no hero. But that's still part of the story, even though there's no one in the room that portrays that. So then again, we know psychedelics can really support visualization and imagery and metaphor. And so often these archetypes show up in when we take something like ketamine, for example, and we start lifting the lid into the right hemisphere, and the right hemisphere begins to actually gives us hints to what roles are trying to show up in the room. And so the client can actually hold all 4 roles, and you'll hear it in their languaging. It can be actually a little confusing, but they can be both the victim and the perpetrator. And so you will see this, for example, where they're feeling the sensation of immobilization because they're the victim of something, but then maybe their hand is moving towards their face and pushing their face down, and now their hand has actually become the perpetrator's hand, right? Mimicking the perpetrators. So that can show up. Or what can happen is whoever else is in the room can show up as actually, I have an example. So for example, when Jean or Chris is assisting me, they can end up showing up as like the bystander role or the perpetrator role, because often men get put in that role. And so, and all it is just a feeling sense where all of a sudden the client's body will start to maybe pull away, and they'll start to get afraid. And it's just leaning into that fear and noticing, okay, let's just stay with that, notice the fear. Or all of a sudden they might feel, if the person is the bystander, if the other person in the room is feeling like they're obsolete, you don't matter, this is nothing, I don't even notice you in the room, you're like wallpaper right now. That's really important information. It's like, okay, let's lean into that. It's like that person in the room is like wallpaper, you don't mean anything to me. It's like, okay, let's stay with that. Let's stay with that relational sense of like, you're obsolete, you don't mean anything, you're like paint on a wall. Because that's probably part of how it felt in past narrative. And so we want to lean in that. Okay. We don't want to think it's real, that it's true, that the person is like paint on the wall. That's not what we're trying to do. But we're just trying to evoke some of that memory narrative and bring it forward so the nervous system can integrate it, the hippocampus can integrate it. I hope that helps. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was great.
Yeah, okay, you're welcome.
Awesome. We had
Another
oh yeah, go
Chris,
ahead.
you mentioned that other question about, what was the one you just said in conjunction with this one, Chris, that someone had proposed? Like there was a question I wanted to answer, but now I can't remember what it was.
Not about jiu-jitsu or bulimia specifically. Those are the last 2 questions.
Okay.
Well,
it doesn't matter. I forgot what it was anyways. Yeah.
okay. Well, yeah, I'll invite Jessica if you want to get on the mic. You had a question about bulimia as a misdirected attempt to differentiate. Just curious, maybe if you want to elaborate on that.
Actually, I think that got answered, but I would be interested, Lisa, you had mentioned at the beginning about how you had used therapy in a bulimic kind of pattern. I would love to know a bit more about that.
Okay, actually, Jess, you're reminding me of the question that it's now jogging my memory. Okay, so we're going to talk about exploitation, we're going to talk about jiu-jitsu, and then we're going to talk about your question on bulimia. So if you take a look, okay, so for me personally, I was continually feeling like there was someone inside of me controlling me. So I was trying to get them out. and I wouldn't use those words before. Like I would not have suggested that before, but now it kind of makes sense to me that that's what was going on. So my therapy, the way I was approaching therapy was really like a purge, like trying to just purge myself of this discomfort, I wasn't trying to expand my window of tolerance. I was trying to purge whatever I felt was inside of me and like narrow my window of tolerance. What helped for me is actually the jiu-jitsu, the combat play. So let me unpack this. So in my case, I had so much exploitation of my body and so much exploitation of my mind and my attachment drives that I was just a robot. Like I was just a walking robot, willing to do what anyone suggested. I had boundaries did not exist for me. So I was just a walking automatic obedience robot. There was I can't even tell you how controllable I was. It was beyond normal. Like you could really see the levels of mind control that had gone on in my world. And my first career was in computer science, and it was because I could not interact with a single individual without just like becoming this robotic, weird thing with them. So the only place I felt any sense of normalcy was behind a computer. And one of the things that supported me in moving away from that is the combat play. So again, I'm going to say jiu-jitsu, but that's not to intimidate people. It's just to give you a sense of one example, physical activity that can support in this. So what I did with jiu-jitsu is, with that exploitation and the feeling of roboticness, I didn't feel like my body was mine. I did not feel like my mind was mine. I didn't feel like my attachment drives were something I deserved and I could actually harness and use and own. So if your body isn't yours and your mind isn't yours, it's a scary place to be. And so the only thing you've got safe, the only thing that you can use to keep yourself safe is food. It's the only thing that's going to keep you out of being exploited. So combat play gave me a place where I could reclaim my body. It gave me a place where I could project in a safe way others in the room that I was playing with through jiu-jitsu and wrestling. They became the villains. They became the perpetrators that were going to exploit my body, that were going to exploit my mind. And I could playfully like work that out where I reclaimed my body. Right. So for example, I could pin them to the ground and run away. I could actually choke them. I could say no. And through the physical act of the combat play, I began to actually reclaim the body, and the exploitation became something that I could see as outside of myself. Okay. Now, prior to that, when I would do therapy, I was trying to get that exploitation to be purged out of me. So for example, TRE, trauma releasing exercises. I love that technique. If you don't know about it, look at traumaprevention.com. It's a great technique. It helps release trauma out of the body. It's easy to do. However, for me, I used it as a bulimic purging. I would go overboard. I'd do it like crazy. Anytime I'd feel any sort of discomfort in my body, I'd try to purge it out with that technique. So that would be one example. And then 2 days later, I'd wonder why I felt awful. Or what I would do is I would go and do like intense forms of therapy, and on like some sort of weekend intensive, and think I was going to be fixed at the end of that. And all it was just purging, trying to purge it out of me. And it never really worked. I take 2 steps forward and like 1.5 steps back. It wasn't until I started doing kind of consistent, slow paced of my process and really started to tame it down and actually understood that I don't want to purge anything out of me other than the outside voices and the outside feelings, and that I wanted to actually I don't want to purge, I want to reclaim. And I'm not trying to get anything out that's inside of me. I'm actually trying to reclaim it and reintegrate it. And what needed to happen instead is for me to separate my stuff from the perpetrator stuff. And that is part of the narrative. And the only way I could do that is actually begin to actually practice the jiu-jitsu piece. That really helped. And then in the psychedelic somatic interactional therapy, started to actually sense more deeply into what was mine and what was actually the other. If that makes any sense. Separate those two. I hope that kind of made enough sense. Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like a very delicate process when you're in the kind of therapeutic container. You have to really pay attention to every little thing that comes up.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, there was a few other comments. Again, I think there may be references to more specific things. I'll just maybe put an invitation out there if anyone would like to just get on the microphone and just kind of have a little back and forth with Lisa. Feel free to just jump on and we can spend maybe last 10 minutes here and just chat a little bit.
And I just want to say, like, Tamara's on I'm seeing Tamara and Jean. They've come on, and I just want to like just point them out right now, just because. So Tamara's like my playmate. So, yeah, just want to acknowledge them. And Jean's one of my assistants, so Jean's right beside her. They've been instrumental in this process. And basically, when I did my doctorate, I studied play, and I didn't know why I was studying play. I didn't know why. I had no clue why I was studying play. And then people would ask me, well, like, how do you implement play as an adult? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just like studying it. I don't know. So I would feel this layer of shame, like, why am I studying something that I can't even practice myself? And then when I finally discovered I was doing other martial arts and I did not get the same feeling. Now I think I would going back. But then when I started to do jiu-jitsu right from the first moment, I was like, oh, this is like 8 years of doctorate work all wrapped up into a 1-hour jiu-jitsu lesson. And I started to make sense. And in that one moment, I could just start to feel like, oh, okay, this is a reclaiming of my body. So. Questions, comments?
Yeah, Lisa, would you recommend any kind of jiu-jitsu for someone that doesn't know about it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Okay, so if you're in Portland, there's Women Empowered. That's trauma-informed jiu-jitsu. So let's unpack this a little bit. So jiu-jitsu has a little bit of a bad reputation in some ways. It's for like meatheads, and I'd have to say that I've met a lot of meatheads, and I would not recommend a studio or a gym with a bunch of meatheads. We've got that on recording. I'm so sorry to all those meatheads out there. Jiu-jitsu is not for everyone. I don't think it's a fit for everyone. It wasn't a fit for me for the first 10 years of my healing. But what happened is, for me personally, I stalled out with my therapeutic process. I stalled, and I was finding myself in massive rage, attacks towards myself, a lot of rage directed towards myself. I couldn't seem to break through into the next layer of my own healing. And that piece, the jiu-jitsu piece, really helped. So it's really important to find a gym where it's trauma informed, if that's possible. There is a book called Transforming Trauma with Jiu-Jitsu that's out. It's lovely. It's written by 2 women. One's a therapist. It's got a lot of polyvagal theory in it. It's got a lot of somatic theory in it. It's an incredible book, like case studies and clinical trials and a whole bunch of stuff in it. I'm impressed with it. So that's a recommendation. And so you do want to interview gyms, and unfortunately some places aren't going to have a bunch of different gyms that you can go to. But my recommendation is, if you really are serious, you can reach out to myself and Jean, and we can actually maybe do some hunting for you in your town to make some recommendations. That's what we've done with other people. In addition, if you can, just get one-on-one coaching. For the first year, I never stepped foot in a class. I just did one. I clung to Tamara and Jean like they were my surrogate parents. I just clung to them for the first year, and I just did a 1-hour session once a week. And then when I complain and say I didn't want to do it, Tamara would kick my butt and make me do it. And that's kind of how I had to start. And I wouldn't do anything else. I'd said, if you really want to try it, if you really want to try it and you want to do the once a week, like 1-hour thing with someone who will do private sessions with you, I will talk with them. I will talk with whoever you hire and explain to them what you are looking for. And Jean can also do the same thing, because I don't want you to get hurt. And jiu-jitsu is a place you can get hurt if you don't have the right person on board who's there to protect you. And I think I've been doing jiu-jitsu for almost 2 years now. I have not got hurt once. And I think the reason is because I've got the right team. I've got the right people helping me and protecting me and keeping me safe. And so it's not just about the jiu-jitsu. It's not just about the physical activity. It is about the community that's holding you and keeping you safe. If people are neglecting you and they're not paying attention, you're bound to do some sort of reenactment, right? So I just want to make that. It's not about the jiu-jitsu. It is, I'm going to say that again, it's not about the jiu-jitsu. It's about, we are doing play, combat play. And if you think about children, the children who do the best kind of play are the ones that have a healthy holding environment, right? They're in a family system where they're being looked after, they're being protected. So then they can play. They can practice these cops and robbers because they've got a safe place to do it. And that's ultimately what we're looking for. I hope does that help? Okay. And if you're dead against jiu-jitsu, I am all for that. I am not going to influence you on or encourage you. If your intuition is saying don't do jiu-jitsu, please don't do jiu-jitsu. There are other martial arts out there that you can try, and I would say just experiment. There is one, Tai Chi for two. If you type in Tai Chi for two, it actually uses Tai Chi to encourage attachment. And so if you've got a partner, or even if you hire a Tai Chi for two coach, they will actually do a lot of those like the temporal and the somatic and the interpersonal domains can actually get integrated just through the Tai Chi one. So there's way more gentle ways to do it.
It's awesome. It seems like the underlying thread there is some sort of interaction that goes beyond just our kind of normal, very strict boundaries kind of thing, but within a container where there's a sense of safety, support. And I like that you kind of put it in like a family context, because a family takes care of each other, even though sometimes family gets into some fights and some conflict. So
Yeah. The jiu-jitsu community is so conflictual. Like they're all like arguing with one another, from what I can tell. So we definitely are a family.
That's cool.
But I will say that much of my memories came back the more that my body felt an internalization of safety, right? So the more I did jiu-jitsu, the more that I was getting memories back, the more that my narratives were coming back, the more I felt safe in getting these memories back. I never felt safe in getting these memories back before. But so jiu-jitsu was helping me get memories back. Now, some of these memories were pretty horrific. So it makes sense, right? You're going to get more of the horrific memories come back, the more you have that internalization of safety. If you feel like you can't defend yourself against a threat, your brain is not going to give you memories of threats. It might give you nuances, but it's not going to give you the whole context. So I guess that's the last piece I will say is the correctives are so important. The brain went unconscious. The brain forgot. The brain doesn't have a healthy, coherent narrative because there was some level of lack of safety, whether the safety had come in the form of like not enough nurture or not enough protection or not enough of your own internal fight, not enough boundary. Some level of safety wasn't there. And until that corrective, until there's a glimmer of that corrective in place, your nervous system's not going to give you those event memories. Why would they? They were buried for a reason. So the corrective is really, 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 really important.
Set and setting, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll see one more piece. So, okay, so if we just unpack the blueberries and milk and sugar. So a child is going to, blueberries, milk, and sugar with sedative. And the perpetrator is handing you it and they're looking at you like you need to forget. So the child's looking up at them going, I need to forget. So the scared child is going to comply, because what happens if child remembers? If child remembers, that perpetrator is going to get even scarier. Right? It's going to be really scary. So that child's going to work real hard in forgetting, real hard. So what does that mean? That means 2 or 3 things. That the only way those memories are going to come back is if that child inside knows 1 of 2 or 3 things, that they can defend that threat if it ever happens again. That makes sense? So if memory comes up and the memory says, you're remembering, you can't remember, bad things are happening, the child can go, nah, 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 nah. I know how to do a chokehold, right? So all of a sudden the child is like, I think I've got a corrective. I think it's possible that I'm going to be okay, even if I do remember. Okay. Or I have a strong team of other people looking after me, so you don't scare me anymore. That's the community. In my case, the Jiu-Jitsu community. That makes sense? So every one of us has a story, and it's like Morse code, and it's showing up in our disordered eating. And if we can find the correctives that are needed in our own story, right? The story of the ways that we needed to be protected by other people, the stories in which we needed to be taught how to protect ourselves, the stories about how we needed to use our voice and we couldn't. If we can find the correctives to our story and we begin to actually just even feel them out and start to imagine them, then those memories are more easily accessed. The question that Saj suggests in the PSI model is, if the threat happens again, what can you do differently? And so in this case, it's like, again, it just depends on what your history is. If the threat happens again, what can I do different? Or what can happen that's different is going to be, okay, I've got a friend that can come in and help me. Okay, now I know how to run away. Okay, now I know how to set a boundary. Now I have a team of people that can keep me safe.
Like, instead of just going straight to the kind of escapist reaction or the kind of protective reaction.
You got it. The old solution, which is dissociate and then protect through food or flight or, yeah.
Beautiful. Well, wonderful, Lisa. Let's close it there. This has been really informative. Again, I really appreciate the clarity and articulation you have around these very delicate subjects. And I think a lot of it is due to your personal experience with this and your education and training. So those things together, really happy that we've found some deep insights into these very important topics. So yeah, thank you again. I left some links in the chat there so you can get in touch with Lisa. Lisa, if you have any other things you want me to throw in the chat there, a website or email, I put the websites that are in your bio though, so I think people will be able to find it there. But if there's anything else you want to add, let me know.
I think I'm considering on doing a course, like a six-week course. And I'm just kind of feeling it out to see if people are actually interested. It would be in January if I do it. If you guys are interested, maybe just ping me like an email. I just want to get a feel on who might be interested in learning more about this.
Yeah, do you want me to drop your email in the chat?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, let's see, I'm gonna pull it up here. Maybe you can remind me your email. I think I have it here
Actually, I've got it on my square. Yeah.
on where?
So I've realized I've got my email on my square, on my little square. So I think people know.
Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay. Yeah, LisaEmbodyingChange.com. Great. All right.
I think the last thing is this topic can overwhelm you, and because it contradicts everything that we hear in our culture. Our culture is very much about follow this food plan, do it this way. You can fix your problem in 3 steps or less. And so there's a part of me that's like, I'm deeply sorry. It's not that simple. But so if you're walking away a little overwhelmed, I understand. And I'm here for you if you need me. And yeah, I mean, if I can do this, you guys can do this. It's definitely here for you. And I feel like the steps are getting more and more clear. Like the PSI model, I think it's very, very useful. And there's other tools that I also use and I've had to use, and maybe I can bring that out for another talk.
Yeah, and I definitely echo that. I've seen people overcome some amazing things, especially when you have the right tools and the right support. You know, psychedelic medicines are really a huge step forward and big breakthroughs now, especially with things like PTSD and
Yeah.
related stuff. So yeah, find the right support, the right tools. Really, there is a path forward. So thank you everyone for coming. Let Lisa and I know if you have follow-up questions. I will get a recording to everybody that registered on Zoom. And the meetup group, Open Mind Integration, is a great place to stay in touch with events like this. Also, my newsletter at openmindintegration.com. You can sign up there. So hope to see you all again, and we'll definitely see Lisa again. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for hosting this. This is
Of course.
great.
All right. Have a good weekend. Good night. Take care, everyone.
Bye.